Today we had the first official response from the Secretary General of Hezbollah, Sheikh Naim Qasim, about the latest developments when it comes to the resistance in Lebanon, what's happening, and their response about the developments in Syria, during which he's saying that the resistance has won. The resistance in Lebanon has won. Why? Because they forced Israel to have a ceasefire, and they made Israel fail in their objective to destroy Hezbollah. And he's true. He's right about that. Why? Because you judge a success or lack thereof of a war based on the objectives of the war. Now, although Netanyahu himself did not mention it as an official statement that he wants to destroy Hezbollah, he did mention that alongside people from his cabinet, but the main thing he mentioned is, added it officially, is returning people back to the north, returning Israeli settlers back to the north. That's something that he hasn't done so far. And that's a win for the Hezbollah movement. Why? Because, well, Israel couldn't do anything against them, and they had the biggest attack on Israel one day before we had a ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah. Sheikh Naim Qasim also mentioned that the resistance is going to continue. The resistance doesn't stop, and it isn't based on back and forth confrontation when people are expecting everything to either go all out or for one side to be completely destroyed. And again, that's something that we have witnessed in recent years. Hezbollah and Israel have had exchanges previously in which Israel failed to accomplish what it wants, apart from destruction, really. And although they did have success in assassinating the Secretary General and senior figures of Hezbollah, they haven't been able to affect their capabilities. And Hezbollah have proven that with their continued strikes on the genocide entity up until the last minute. So he's saying the resistance wins by points. We're not talking about one blow and a decisive victory all of a sudden. Every time we have a battle with them, we gain more power, we can hit them harder, and time is on our side. That's when it comes to the resistance in Lebanon. And from his tone, he appears to be saying that the ceasefire is going to continue. It doesn't look like we're going to have a further escalation despite Israeli breaches. Clearly Hezbollah are interested in keeping it, and on the ground Israel indeed started to withdraw from certain areas in accordance to the ceasefire plan. So Hezbollah, by not being dragged into responding to the Israeli provocations and breaches to the ceasefire, have succeeded so far in letting Israel withdraw and having the Lebanese army and coordinating eventually with the Lebanese army, again indicating that there's nothing new here when it comes to the situation in the south, apart from Resolution 1701 that took effect after 2006 when Israel and Hezbollah had a war at the time. And then he spoke about Syria. Again, you know, many people realize by now that the tone from Iran, from Hezbollah, it changed significantly when it comes to Syria. Now Hezbollah are saying that, well, they're confirming that we have taken a loss when it comes to the land route of Hezbollah's weapons from Syria. However, this doesn't mean it will continue this way, according to Sheikh Naim Qasim. The new regime will come and the path may be the same again. This is the first indication coming from Hezbollah that there might be again something happening between them and Syria. He also said we need to be adaptable as a resistance and we may find other ways. We have the power to adapt. They also added the Syrian people have the right to choose their leaders, their constitution, and their future. And we hope they do so without foreign intervention. We hope the new Syria will be for all Syrians. And we hope that those in power will consider Israel as an enemy and that the situation gets stable. Israel and the US, according to Sheikh Naim Qasim, are applying a lot of pressure in the region. And these were the highlights of his speech. Now, that's indicating a massive shift coming from Hezbollah. We're talking about a movement that has been participating in Syria for a very long time, up until, well, the Astana agreements, but their forces were present inside of Syria, likewise with Iran. but they have changed their tone when it comes to the people who are in power in Syria. Previously, they were their enemies. They were fighting inside of Syria. Hezbollah was criticized by many for participating in the Syrian civil war. And others, no, they said it was a good thing because they protected Syria. However, the reality is, both from the government side and from the opposition side, there were movements who were sectarian in their nature, and they did not help the Syrian people in general. But the situation clearly has changed, and there was, at the end of the day, a revolution inside of Syria, regardless of which path it took and what mistakes happened. But clearly now we have a new reality, and we don't have a situation of the years 2013, 14, 15, even 2020. Clearly there has been a development there, and Hezbollah have been informed about this development. They agreed to that development. Why? Because now we have more revelations about Iranian involvement, and if there was Iranian involvement, that means there was Hezbollah involvement when it comes to Syria. So what was that involvement? Well, the recent statements that came from the Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan, who was the head of the intelligence previously, again clarifying about his agreement between Russia and Iran before the collapse of Bashar al-Assad. In his recent interview, televised interview in a Turkish channel, he said, "We spoke with the Iranians and Russians about things I do not wish to mention now. However, after it, they made contact with Assad and he fled." He also added that we warned Israel from continuing attacking Syria. And I'll get to the attack of Israel and the warnings that are not just coming from Turkey, but from Ahmad al-Shara and the Syrian government themselves, and what they're doing in terms of actions and their declarations about a potential war or lack thereof when it comes to Israel. So the bit that I wanted to highlight here is things I do not wish to mention now, coming from Hakan Fidan, again clarifying that there have been agreements between him and Iran and Russia. All of that supports the notion that there has been an agreement, there have been reassurances. Many things were not published and perhaps should not be published at a sensitive time where Syria is about to rebuild itself. But they're also coming similarly to reports from Iran about, well, them knowing about Bashar being treacherous, and there's no need for him. So you see, the thing that the Turkish were trying to say is that we told the Iranians that the situation, that's it, there's no need for him, but we did not mention the details. What does that mean? Well, there are certain things that we can deal with. And again, Hezbollah are saying, we may have a path. Again, maybe they shouldn't say anything. Maybe they should not say anything and keep everything under the table, despite public scrutiny. That could be the right approach. But even with that, there are certain hints. And of course, we talk about them as in when we hear them, to analyze the situation and discuss it. Which leads me to the warning. Turkey is again warning. Hakan Fidan is warning Syria from attacking, from the provocations. This is coming after previous warnings as well about the attacks, about the territories. Recently, there was a summit in Jordan as well, during which the Jordanian foreign minister himself said, well, what is Israel doing in Syria? The Golan belongs to Syria, and that's coming from Jordan. And now Jordan was one of the countries which condemned what Israel is doing outright alongside Egypt when it comes to the invasion into Syrian territories after the collapse of Bashar al-Assad. And Israel is, of course, using the vacuum, using the fact that the new Syria is at its weakest point now, and trying to capitalize on all of that with another side that is not really able to fight Israel, and they do not have the capacity to fight Israel. This is what Ahmad al-Shara, the leader of HTS, said himself. We are not in a position to have a war with Israel at the moment. What does that mean, and why did he say it? Well, firstly, from a factual perspective, Syria wasn't in a position to wage a war with Israel for a very long time. Syria wasn't in a position to wage war, and that's something every observer almost in the past 14 months asking, why doesn't Syria participate? The response was, well, Syria is busy with its internal stuff. Now, was Syria busy with its internal stuff during al-Assad's rule, and it's not busy with its internal stuff now, after his collapse, after there's a new government, after they need to have security, make sure everything is functioning properly, rebuild a destroyed country, and have agreements with everyone about a new constitution, new government, and a destroyed military? Fact of the matter is, now they're in a much less strong position, a much weaker position to have a war when it comes to Israel. In the form of Syria as a state, because they're not equipped for it. Bashar al-Assad's army wasn't equipped for it. All of the weapons that Israel even destroyed inside of Syria, apart from some of the more advanced air defense system like the Panzer and the S-300, they could do hardly anything when it comes to just a couple of missiles. Navy, Air Force, they can do nothing for Israel. And the fact that Israel started to attack them immediately after the collapse of Assad means that they weren't really threatened by them. With Assad, they were worried about them falling in the hands of the new Syrian government, and they did not want that. But let's see what are the statements that came from Julani, from Ahmad al-Shara, and when it comes to Israel, when it comes to rebuilding, and when it comes to everything. Okay, let's start off with the moves. Firstly, the Syrian government, they are officially taking it with the United Nations, saying that what Israel is doing is completely unacceptable and it goes against the 1974 agreement. So they are going against these moves diplomatically, and they're saying the only way to deal with it is diplomatically. We are in no position to wage a war with Israel with such a gamble, according to Julani. He said, I will bring myself forward to the presidency if I was asked to. We are looking to have mutual defense pacts and strategic military relations with several countries. This is something very important, because the main thing that would put Syria in a position that would deter Israel and other of Syria's enemies is to have a defense pact with a stronger country. That way, the other country, or like Israel mainly in that case, or any other country too, would know that, okay, we're dealing with two countries here, because defense pact means the two countries would support each other in case of war. And he already is mentioning a defense pact. That's something I was talking about a few days back when it comes to what's expected from Syria. So he said, we're looking to have mutual defense pacts and strategic military relations with several countries. In my opinion, the immediate defense pact would happen with Turkey, undoubtedly. The moment that everything is functioning when it comes to Syria, they will have a defense pact with Turkey, and do not be surprised if they have strategic military relations with Iran at a later stage, just so that they do not attract more hostilities in the initial phases. He said also 95% of Israeli claims to justify attacks are baseless. The military command is not in a position to wage a war with Israel. He was very clear when it comes to that. Israel wanted to invade all of Syria under the Iranian pretext, and there is no more Iranian presence. And the Israelis crossed the confrontation lines when it comes to Syria, and this is a threat that could lead to an unjustified escalation in the region. Why is he saying that? He's saying that because they have priorities. They have priorities. You're talking about a country that suffered for decades from sanctions, 14 years civil war, war-torn, millions of refugees, hundreds of thousands of killed, half of the country is destroyed from infighting. And he highlighted the priorities. Al-Julani said the priority at this stage is for rebuilding and the stability, and not to be dragged into confrontations that will bring further destruction. The international community must urgently act against recent Israeli escalation. there is a need to set things in order in the region and respect Syrian sovereignty, diplomatic solutions are the only way to ensure security and stability, far from any miscalculated military gambles. There were other reports too. What are the reports? Firstly, that the government in Syria is asking all of the armed groups to hand in their weapons to the Ministry of Defense. This includes HTS, the Syrian National Army, the movements in northeast Syria, any other Palestinian movements that have weapons inside them. Now, mind you, when it comes to the Palestinian weapons, by the way, don't overestimate, because the previous government under Bashar al-Assad stripped many of them off, especially after there were tensions during the years of the revolution, such as the case with the Al Yarmouk siege, when Bashar al-Assad's forces besieged the Palestinian refugee camp that led to the death of over 200 people. And there were clashes and confrontations, and not many of them have lots of weapons. But what the new Syrian government is looking to do is, in effect, have all of the weapons of the forces that even had this campaign, the deterrence of aggression, to hand them in and have a defense ministry. That's it. Why? Because if you're looking at a country and they want to have defense package, strategic military relations, you don't want armed groups in the country. You want stability. And that needs to be under the Ministry of Defense to start making deals with other countries too. And there are other reports that he met with the southern brigades in the Syrian revolution to talk about the establishment of a united force, asking them to have and be in the Ministry of Defense. There were also other reports about the dismantling outside of the state authority weapons. They will not be allowed whatsoever. And he was also sending a peaceful message to the Kurdish people as well, saying that there's a difference between the Kurdish population and the armed groups like the PKK, for example. And also when it comes to Iran, we have no hostility with the Iranian people. And now that's a man who also did not rule out a strategic relationship with Iran in the future, right? So you're talking about an approach that is very different than the approaches that they previously had when it comes to, well, Iran and the other movements too, internally, externally, the reassurance, the fact that you have so many minorities supporting what's happening now. And the priority is to set things straight when it comes to all of the internal factors inside of Syria, in the majority of the territories, from all of the territories of Syria, to focus on what is most necessary and most needed when it comes to the Syrian people. And what is that? That it would be to secure the country, not have a case of lawlessness. Start rebuilding all of the destroyed locations, bring all of the people back to their homes, or those who want to return to Syria. Start working on the economy and the livelihood about people. In the meantime, when Syria is in such a weak point when it comes to its military, and when some countries want Syria to be a demilitarized state, like Israel and the United States, they want weak countries, they will be looking initially to have a defense pact immediately as soon as they have the Ministry of Defense, and potentially that's something we can see literally in the next few weeks. And that's a shockingly quick time, by the way. Usually things take much more time, but clearly what's happening in Syria indicates that the armed groups and the people leading this new government, this new transition government, did learn a lot of lessons from the previous Arabic uprisings, from what was called the Arab Spring. They saw what happened in Libya, they saw what happened in Egypt, in Tunisia, and they did not want a repeat. And that's why their tone changed, their approach changed. You were talking about a campaign to take down al-Assad that hardly had any sort of bloodshed, no mentions of civilian killings. Many of those who they were waiting to fight them when it comes to the Assad army. They just simply handed in their weapons, put their civilian clothes, went back, and Assad himself fled. Assad himself fled. Hezbollah and Iran did not participate, again saving a lot of blood, and that's exceptionally important, and that is something that we haven't seen in the Arab world for a very, very long time, despite all of the propaganda campaign you're seeing, despite the 10-year-old clips to justify certain positions. The situation in Syria requires a lot of monitoring, and all of the monitoring and establishing of the situation needs to, of course, come with caution and with everyone being inquisitive about it. But at the end of the day, they are doing something without bloodshed. The situation is changing rapidly. They're looking to have a solid state very quickly. And that's something that they clearly learned from state actors at the end of the day. You're not talking about movements who will have that just as a natural thing. Clearly, any support that they've had from Turkey or from any other countries too indicates that they know what they're doing, and they're looking to rebuild the country as soon as possible. However, the situation is still in the early days, and there are a lot of threats going on. Now we have more talks about an Israeli attack in Iran. Israel is a reckless entity looking to use and exploit every situation to take down any sort of benefit to the people in the region. Israel is a cancerous tumor that goes against the will of all of the people in the region, and only naive people do not recognize this fact. And now there are talks about Iran would potentially lead to something bigger, because we still have an operation from Iran that is pending. Iran clearly is delaying this operation because they can see a relatively successful yet very fragile ceasefire in Lebanon that could potentially be extended to Gaza. They want to see that happening before they decide to take any action. However, Israel before used the delay of Iran when it comes to the response and started escalating further inside of Iranian territories. Many observers said that, well, if it wasn't for the Iranian delay, then perhaps Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah wouldn't have been assassinated. That's something that has been reiterated by many, including those who support Iran. So will Iran wait and receive another potentially much bigger blow from Israel, and even a successful blow, because you can't really call the previous attack from Israel on Iran a successful attack? It was partially successful, but mostly the Iranian air defense systems took it down very well, and Israel was scared to even come near the Iranian territories. So a lot of interesting things ahead, and of course in the meantime we will be observing, monitoring everything and talking about it. And that's about it for this video. I hope I shed some light as to what's happening, and I will see you soon in the next video. Peace, everyone.